You might hear Starlight Tour and think it sounds fun, but not in Saskatoon, not this place, not this time. Minus 28 degrees in the dead of night. They picked him up and drove him out of sight. Neil Stonechild was only 17, found face down where the winter winds had been. One shoe missing, marks upon his wrist. Another brown boy the system dismissed. Starlight tours through the prairie snow, protect and serve, but we all know the badge and the uniform, blood on their hands, a pattern carved across these lands. But who believes native sons and men? Darrell Night lived to tell the story. Against all odds he reached the power station's light. His survival and courage to speak shattered the silence buried in the night. Lloyd, Dusty Horn, Darcy, Dean, Iron Child, Rodney, Naistus, Lawrence, Wegner, too, frozen where the city limits cut through. 8 months in prison, that's where it stopped, while Neil's investigation was quietly dropped. And no more justice came for the others. Starlight tours through the prairie snow, protect and serve, but we all know the badge and the uniform, blood on their hands, a pattern carved across these lands. But who believes native sons and men? The stories whispered, carried on the wind. A boy, a survivor, that could have been. The cold doesn't forget, the snow doesn't lie. We lift their names and we testify. Starlight tours through the prairie snow, the whole community tried to let them know. Neil was a boy just 17. Daryl survived to speak what he'd seen, and no wonder people feel the blue. And protect and serve don't apply to you. Speak their names into the winter wind. Neil Stonechild, we remember him. The truth was there, quiet but strong. Now we live their stories through our song, in memory of Neil Stonechild. Of the Starlight Tours, with gratitude to Darrell Night for speaking true, for speaking true.
Live on the air, Trial Junkies United presents Justice After Dark with your host, Z.
Boy, guys, I'm glad you're all here. I was running late tonight. Poor Doc, I ran him right to the wire. What can I say? He was waiting on me. I had my pictures done. I was putting them in the slides, and I went to delete something, and I deleted them all. Oops. So I had to start over. So some of the pictures are going to be wacky, but hey, it's us. So you know that's how it goes. And give my beautiful mods some love, Fowla and Irish Amy, the Luna Princess. Sleuthy sweetheart Stormy made it. She had an adventure today. We have Semi Sharp and Ben. And let's see. I thought I saw. Who am I missing? Am I missing? I know I'm missing somebody. I thought. Okay. If I am, I'm sorry. I apologize. Ooh, how come my thing's circling, Doc?
No, what's circling?
My laptop. Oh, no, I'm fine. Never mind. Oh, Pammy. I'm missing Pammy. I thought, okay. Pammy made it. Yay. Okay, guys. We're ready. Hey, Frank. Good to see you. Welcome to TGU Presents Justice After Dark. It's Thursday night, and so you know we're going to be dedicating this episode to our missing and murdered Indigenous brothers and sisters. And so greetings to all the truth seekers, the trial junkies, and the justice warriors. I'm Z, your storyteller. In the wilderness of injustice, I have my ride or die Doc, riding shotgun as we navigate the darkness where the predators hunt and the system fails. Are you ready to ride, Doc? It's going to be cold.
Yes, it is.
So let's get started. Imagine it's 2 a.m. You're in the back of a police car, handcuffed. It's 28 degrees Celsius outside. That's, I guess, around, I thought they said minus, well, that doesn't look right, but it's cold.
It's cold.
It's very cold.
Yes.
So it's cold enough that actually, if your skin gets exposed, it will freeze in minutes, you guys. That's how cold we're talking. Now, the car stops in the middle of nowhere. It's dark. It's remote. Just a frozen prairie for miles. The officers pull you out of the car. They take off your handcuffs. They get back in the car. And you ask, how am I supposed to get home? They roll down the window and they say, that's your expletive problem. And they drive away.
Mm-hmm.
You're wearing a t-shirt, a light jacket, no hat, no gloves. You can see lights in the distance, maybe a kilometer away, and you start walking. Your hands go numb, then your feet, your ears burn. But you start feeling warm, which means your body is shutting down. This is called a Starlight Tour. And this is how Indigenous people in Canada have been deleted by the police for decades. And tonight we're going to expose it because the victims, the survivors, their families, the cover-ups, the systematic racism that has let this happen. And I'm telling you right now, the story is going to make you angry. Tonight, we're going to tell a story that deserves to be heard, a story society really wants to leave buried, and they've tried. But we refuse to let the silence be betrayal. So buckle up, because we're going to tell this one. And here we go, Doc. Now, this picture is of a woman that is angry. And before we dive in deeper, I want you to hear something. This is what this woman said on camera in Saskatoon, who was defending two of the police officers who were on trial for abandoning an Indigenous man in the deadly cold. She said, why are we blaming these two officers? Why do they have to take the blame for everyone that's dead? It's not their fault that everyone's dead. What about the guy's arrest record? What about the trouble he's been in? Does that mean you should die? No, that doesn't mean he should die. Nobody should die. I'm not racist. My friends are Indian as well. That is just the worst thing a white person can say. I have Indian friends. Honey, not after that episode, you don't. And so this is what we're dealing with. That's the attitude in Canada. You know, we always hear the Canadians are super friendly and nice and kind, and mostly they are. But that doesn't hide the racism like in every other country. So think about that. Just like we have it here, just like we're seeing what the police are doing, what ICE is doing. This has been going on for decades up there in Canada against the Indigenous and Native people, or the First Nations. And we can't let this practice continue. We have to talk about it, and we have to tell people what the Starlight Tour is about. Because a Starlight Tour is not some event. It's not a sightseeing trip. It's not some gentle night drive under the beautiful stars. A Starlight Tour is a death sentence wrapped in a badge. It's when the police officers, the people who swore to protect and serve, pick up Indigenous people, drive them to the frozen outskirts of the city in the dead of winter, and abandon them to die. And up there in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, that temperature can drop to minus 28, minus 30, even minus 40 degrees Celsius, you guys. And a lot of these guys had, no coat, no shelter, no way home, just miles of frozen prairie and the cold certainty you're not going to survive. And it's not ancient history. This is Saskatoon, Canada from the 1970s, when in the first report, 80s, 90s, and 2000s. And it's still happening today. And I had Lissa tell me that it happens here in the United States as well. So we can't kid ourselves. Mm-hmm. This is serious. So let me take you back to where this story is going to begin. We're going to talk about Neil Stonechild. Now he's 17 years old and he's a kid. And before the headlines and before the inquiry that eventually came out, and before the words Starlight Tour were ever spoken in public, Neil Stonechild was just a kid trying to live his life. He was 17 years old. He was a bright, funny, athletic Cree Saulteaux youth from Saskatoon. He played hockey. He wrestled, was an Army cadet. He cracked jokes. He dreamed about the future. He loved round dances, but he wasn't perfect. None of us were when we were 17. I'm sure if we all sit back and try and think, what was I like at 17?
I was a dweeb.
I can't ever imagine that, Doc. But all of his friends talked about what an awesome kid he was. People looked up to him. He was the kind of person everybody wanted to be around. And the girls liked him because he was cute. And his mother, Stella, she loved that boy. She called him her baby boy, even though he was actually the third child. She had 4. So she had an older son and an older daughter. And then you see Neil in the middle of the kids, and then her youngest. And everybody said he had a sharp mind and a big heart. Now, Neil had gotten into some trouble. I'm not going to lie. He had got some shoplifting charges, and, he drank, a lot of kids do at that age. And so he was supposed to turn himself in to I guess it was kind of like a halfway house to finish serving his time. But he wanted one more night out with his friends. Okay. So he actually called the woman that was in charge, and he told her, he says, you can come pick me up tomorrow and I'll be ready to go. And so she agreed to it, because he was going to come in willingly. He had talked his older brother into buying him some vodka because he was going to go out with his friends. They were going to play some cards and just have a nice evening. So this is November 24th, 1990, Saturday night. He's out with his friends. He'd told his mom, I'm turning myself in. It was a minor warrant. The group house manager planned on picking him up at noon, had a time. So 5 days later, on November 29th, 1990, a construction worker was installing a fence. And what did he find? He found something in the distance, and he started walking towards it because he was curious. And he went over there. Oh, that's his mama. That's Stella. For some reason, my pictures are a little slow tonight. That's probably me. But anyway, so this is 5 days after he didn't come home. And at first, his mom was just a little concerned. She thought, well, maybe he'd gone up to see a friend before he went back in. But the worker saw this, and he realized it was a body. And so he contacted the authorities. Now, the interesting thing was that the officer who took the report, you're going to find out some information about him. So don't forget that, okay? So we're going to pin that for now. But his body is frozen on the northwest edge of Saskatoon. He's 160 feet from where they were working. And as you can see, he has a Letterman jacket on. He only had on a white t-shirt. He had red flannel jeans, he had double underwear on. And sometimes, when people go into jail or whatever, they actually wear 2 pairs of underwear. I've heard that from someone that has been there before, because that way you always have a clean pair. Don't ask me. Never been there. And he has 2 socks, but he only has 1 shoe, you guys. The shoe that he has on, that shoelace is undone. There's a rock in his shoe. His hands are wrapped in his jacket sleeves, pulled across his chest. So he was trying to keep warm. He had no hat, no gloves, and he was known to always wear a baseball cap. Not that would keep you super warm, but it would be something on your head. The temperature that night that he disappeared had dropped to minus 28 Celsius. He had bruises on his face. He had abrasions on his nose and cheeks. I'm not going to show you those pictures, and I have seen them. And he had 2 circular marks on his chest that looked like it could have come from a police baton, and cuts on his wrists that looked exactly like handcuff marks. So you might be asking, how did he get out here? What happened? Well, let's start with the last person that saw him. And that would have been his friend, Jason Roy. He was one of them that he'd been at the party with. Well, he had a girl that he had liked and had dated. And then his mom and them broke him up because they were second cousins, but he was still kind of gaga over her. And he had seen her that day. And so he talks Jason into going with him to the apartment that she lived in. And he wanted to talk to her. And so they go, and first they're at the quick shop, the mini mart or whatever, and they didn't have any money. So they snuck a Coke behind the potato chip aisle, but they dropped some chips. Well, then the person working saw them and said, "Get out of here, I'm calling the cops." So they took off, got to the apartment building, looked at the list of people that are there, but they can't find anybody's name that they know. Hey, Katrina. Yeah, I said second cousins. And so they decide to start knocking on doors. It's late. They're knocking on doors, and, people get irritated. He finally finds the right door, but she won't talk to him. She's telling them to go away. She's at her sister's house. She tells her sister's boyfriend, call the cops. So Jason's like, I'm getting out of here. And he takes off, and then Neil, he's going to walk off too. And he turns and goes to leave. Well, the next time Jason sees him is down the road a bit. And what he saw was Neil in the back of a police cruiser around midnight. He said Neil was crying. He had blood on his face. He was handcuffed in the back seat. And he was screaming, "Jay, help me. These guys are going to kill me." But the thing was, Jay was afraid. He said, because the cops actually stopped him and asked for his name. And he said, if I tell them who I am, he goes, he knew they were going to arrest him. So he gave, I think it was his cousin's name, because he knew his cousin had never been in trouble and nothing would come up if they punched that in. And they did. And so they let him go. So when he got back to the party, everybody's like, "Where's Neil?" And he said, the cops got him. But here's what they said. The police called it speculation. And they closed this case in 4 days before they even received the coroner's report, before they completed any witness interviews, before they explained the injuries, before they explained why Neil was missing a shoe, and how he walked 9 kilometers in a snowstorm. The investigating officer's words were, well, the kid went out, got drunk, and went for a walk and froze to death. Case closed. No charges. No investigation. And if you look at the map, the red dot at the top is where Neil was found. And you can see 9 kilometers away is where they picked him up. There's no way he could have walked 9 kilometers in that kind of weather. He wouldn't have made it that far. And the other thing is, and this really got to me, is the original investigation, which, okay, we know it's a cover-up. And that's just, they said, well, he was going to turn himself in because up above there is actually a correction facility. There's one little problem with that, you guys. It was an adult facility. He was 17. He was a minor. They weren't going to take him. That's not where he was supposed to go. In fact, the next map that comes up will show you that the place that he was supposed to go the next day was in the totally opposite direction. So he was supposed to go way down there. So that didn't even make sense.
Keep in mind, guys, all this is happening at 18 below in Fahrenheit, right, our temperature.
Yeah.
And in a snowstorm.
Exactly. Now, Jason did give a statement on November 30th, the day after Neil was found. He did go to the police and he told them he had seen Neil with 2 police officers. And that statement, guess what happened to it, Doc?
Oh, they found it and everything was peachy keen.
Nope, it disappeared from the file.
Yeah, well, that kind of makes sense.
Yeah. In late December, Jason was actually arrested on an outstanding warrant because he wasn't a perfect kid either. But while he had been taken in, the officers approached him about his statement about Neil and asked him to rethink it. Well, Jason was 19. He was scared. His friend was dead because of a couple of cops. So he wrote a new statement for him. One that left out the part about seeing Neil in the back of a police cruiser. He said he was blacked out and didn't remember because he was scared. Who wouldn't be? Hey, Billy, good to see you. So can you imagine you're being a teenager, you're being pressured by the very people who just deleted your friend, knowing that if you tell the truth, you could be next. But Neil's mother, Stella Bignell, she refused to move on. That woman became a warrior for the truth. For over a decade, you guys, she fought through her grief, through the denial, through a wall of official silence. And here's what Stella said years later, words that are going to haunt us all. She said, I do want closure on this. I want answers, and there have never been any answers. We're still dealing with unanswered questions to what happened to this human being. It could be anybody's child. And I think anybody out there that would have had this happen to them would want to know what and how this happened. And we still don't know. We still don't know the truth. She says, I never forget my son. When it's cold out there, it doesn't bother me when I'm shaking and cold because he was out here freezing. I can go inside and get warm. He never got that chance. He wasn't given the opportunity to save himself. And I know he wanted to. Think about that. Every time it gets cold, she's thinking about her son and his death. Every winter, every cold night for the rest of her life. Her oldest son that bought the vodka for the kids, he deals with guilt. And he shouldn't have to. A decade of silence. For 10 years, there were whispers amongst the Native and First Nations people in Saskatoon. Some of them knew what was up. In fact, back in 1976 was actually the first recorded case, and it was actually a woman. But in June of 2000, during all this chaos, there was a new police chief. Before I get to the chaos, he actually did admit about the 1976 incident. He said the officer was disciplined, not arrested, not charged. He was disciplined for taking a Native woman to the outskirts of the city and abandoning her in the cold. We don't even know her name. She's the first documented victim lost to history because nobody thought her story mattered enough to even record it properly. Think about that.
And he's still on the job.
Yep. This practice was known and documented in 1976. An officer got a slap on the wrist, and then the whole thing got swept under the rug for decades, while officers kept doing it. It starts at the top, you guys, and it works its way down. How many victims were there? We're never going to know. How many people froze to death in those fields while police reports called it hypothermia or accidental death or drunken disorderly who wandered off? But it gets worse. In the early 90s, while this was happening, there was a serial killer named John Martin Crawford. And I think that's the one we've covered before. And he was targeting Native women in Saskatoon. So bodies were being found southwest of the city. And you know what the Saskatoon police were doing while these women were being found? And then here's these men that are being found frozen. Hey, Mustang. Well, let me tell you what they were doing in the year 2000. They were using a lifelike poster right there on the screen of an Indigenous looking woman for target practice at their shooting range. Let that sink in.
Mm-hmm.
They were using an Indigenous woman's picture while Indigenous women were being deleted by a serial killer. Indigenous men were being left to freeze, and police were using the image of an Indigenous woman for target practice. When the public found out, there was outcry. Of course, the police defended it, saying it was a Caucasian lady. Oh, yeah.
Oh, what's that got to do with anything?
I'm sure he has friends that are natives. Impersonation.
Yeah.
Like the crazy woman.
Oh.
So the poster eventually was discontinued, but the message was clear. Indigenous lives, First Nations lives, they didn't matter to them. And another kick in the teeth, in 2016, you guys, someone from inside the Saskatoon police station went onto Wikipedia and deleted the entire entry about Starlight Tours. They were able to trace the IP address from the station to the deletion. But they don't know who did it, but they could trace it to the station. So they were literally trying to erase history, which we see that happening today. You can't delete history. We have good memories, and we're going to keep telling the stories.
And I take it nobody within the police department or was actually in any hurry to find out who was responsible for deleting that information.
No, they were not.
Nope.
Hey,
Okay.
Miss Barbara made it. Good to see you, sweetheart. So let's talk about the survivor who actually shatters the silence, because he did make it. January 28th, 2000. This is the night that changed everything. Darrell Night was a 33-year-old First Nation man from Saskatoon First Nation in Cree. He was at his uncle's apartment at a party around 5 a.m. Two women at the party started fighting over a missing purse. Now, I'm going to tell you guys right now, when men fight, people break it up. When women fight, oh Lord, get out of the way. Don't even attempt. Don't go in there. It ain't going to be pretty. I actually was on a job one time when we had a couple of girls get in a cat fight, and a couple of the other supervisors that were men thought that they would get in there. I just stood back and said, go for it. I'm staying over here where it's safe. I ain't getting in the middle of two women doing a cat fight. That can get ugly and dangerous, right, Doc?
Yep.
So Daryl decided things are too wild here. So he decided he was going to leave, and he was going to walk across the park because his sister lived over there, and he was going to spend the night with his sister just around the corner. So as he's coming out of the building, he sees a police car, and he thought, okay, well, they're coming to fix this fight. But the officers were going to another call, and I guess they said that Daryl kind of hit the back of the car, like, hey. And they got out, and they're like, started arguing with him. And he says, hey, you guys need to go do your job over there. And it was officers Dan Hatchin and Ken Munson. And so Daryl was drunk. He'd been at a party, but he was frustrated. It took these guys so long to show up. And so, he was kind of cussing and flipping them off and told them to get upstairs and break up the fight. Well, instead, they grabbed him and handcuffed him tight and threw him in the back of the car. It was 22 degrees Celsius. Daryl was wearing a button-up shirt, a jean jacket, and running shoes because he didn't have far to go. It wasn't like he was going to put on a bunch of winter clothes, to walk across the park. He figured they were taking him to the drunk tank. He'd been there before. And he didn't mind. His sister told him not to come back drunk anyway. So, hey, I'll go sleep it off. But then the car was going in the wrong direction. They hit the riverbank of the South Saskatchewan River and drove south on Spadina Crescent West, going further outside the city. Now, Daryl had heard stories about Starlight Tours his whole life. Stories that the First Nations people, they whispered to each other. But the broader public always dismissed it as drunk talk or rumors. But as the car kept going further out of town, those stories were becoming his reality. And he tried to mention that he was a childhood friend with a cop, hoping it would make them think twice. But it didn't. At the intersection of Dundonald Avenue and Spadina Crescent West, about a kilometer from the Queen Elizabeth Power Station, the car stopped. One of the officers pulled Daryl out, threw him on the hood of the car, took off the handcuffs. They called him a drunk Indian and other racial slurs. And then they got back in their car and started to slowly pull away. Now, Daryl yelled at him, I'm going to freeze to death out here. They stopped the car, rolled down the window, and one of them said, that's your expletive problem. And you can fill in the expletive. And they drove away. But here's the thing. Darrell Night, he was a smart dude. Even when he was drunk and terrified, he was quick-witted. Enough to see their car number and memorize it before they disappeared into the darkness. Now, the car number actually would end up saving his life in more ways than one. To his left was the city dump, and to his right was the South Saskatchewan River. All the lights were out at a nearby trailer court. But the only lights he could see were off in the distance, and it was the Queen Elizabeth power station. Now, this is about a kilometer away, minus 22 degrees Celsius. Doesn't have enough clothing, but hey, he's going to have to walk the long distance. So Daryl took off. Now, he got to the power station. His ears and his hands and his feet were numb. And he was beginning to feel warm, which is a symptom of hypothermia. Your body's shutting down and your brain thinks you're overheating. Well, there was only one worker that was working that night, and he was actually upstairs working on some stuff. So as Daryl was knocking on the door, because his hands were cold to make a fist, so he was actually using his feet to kick the door. And he said he couldn't tell how hard he was hitting it. No one answered. He walked around the building to another door on the west side of the building, still no answer. He thought about trying to break a window to get inside, but he was also terrified the same officers would come back if someone called a break-in. So for 30 to 45 minutes, Daryl was dying outside that building. But finally, the engineer, and his name was Mark Evo, happened to come downstairs to drop off all the paperwork he was working on at the front of the office, and he spotted Daryl. Now, at this time, it was 6 a.m. Mark let him in, but he was a little nervous about doing it because, Daryl's kind of a big dude. But he asked him if he would get him a cab, and he told him what had happened, and Mark couldn't quite believe it, but, he called him a cab, and the taxi driver arrived. Daryl got in, and the driver joked, "I didn't know they let you drink on the job," because he thought Daryl actually worked at the plant. But Daryl told him what happened. And then the driver took him back to his sister's place. Now, he was supposed to pay him $10 for the fare, but he didn't have it. So he left his jacket and his health card with the driver while he went inside to get the money. But after everything Daryl had been through, he didn't go to the police. Now, why would he? Two Saskatoon police officers had just tried to delete him. How could he trust anybody in the department? He told his family what happened, but he stayed quiet publicly. He figured no one would believe him anyway. But he survived against all odds and against the cold and against what those officers wanted to happen to him. Now, years later, Daryl said, "While I'm happy to be alive, those cops tried to take my life, and I value my life. Nobody deserves that, no matter what nationality they are, black, white, Indian, nobody." And his survival and his courage eventually to speak out is what shattered the silence that had protected these officers for decades, because all of a sudden, bodies started popping up. But before Daryl came forward, just a day later, on January 29th, 2000, about 30 hours after Daryl was abandoned, a woman named Pat Lorge was out for her weekly jog with her neighbor's Dalmatian. She was a member of the Legislative Assembly, basically a politician, and she approached a feed store called Shamrock Feeds at the same time someone was arriving for work. And that's when they both saw someone lying in the snow near the building. Pat described the body as frozen, blue, with his thin clothing and a jacket pulled up around the neck. She said there were frozen tears on his face, and she knew immediately he was Native. She called 911 at 10:56 a.m. and stayed at the scene for 3 hours to answer questions. And that body belonged to Rodney Naistus, I think, and I'm sorry for Rodney's family if I'm saying it wrong. He was 25 years old, you guys. Now, let me tell you about Rodney's last night, because it matters, because he matters. Rodney had just been released from jail on January 27th after serving 7 months for breaking and entering and theft. Correction staff bought him a bus ticket home to Onion Lake First Nation. But he decided to cash in the ticket because he wanted to spend time with his older brother, Daryl, and his cousin, Charlene, and her boyfriend. The brothers were close. They'd grown up being shuffled through group homes together. And the plan was to wait for Daryl to get a check in the mail so they could both catch a bus home together. So on Friday, January 28th, the same night Darrell Night was abandoned, Rodney spent the day celebrating his release. I mean, come on, wouldn't you? He and his family went to the Red Rock Grill around 3 p.m., played pool, had a few beers. They couldn't afford much, but, they just had a nice time. They left around 8 p.m. and went to Charlene's brother's apartment, where they drank until 11. Now, Rodney and a new friend he'd made, a guy named Pat, who was in town for a bricklaying job, wanted to keep the party going. Now, they left to go clubbing around 11:30 p.m. or midnight. Now, Charlene tried to get Rodney to stay home, but he insisted, and they couldn't get into Jack's nightclub because Rodney was too drunk. And so the bouncers wouldn't let him in. So he didn't meet the dress code. So they went to Winston's pub and drank until closing at 2. Pat met a woman at the pub and they decided to go to Diva's nightclub, but the woman didn't want Rodney to come. She gave Rodney her beer and left with Pat, and they couldn't get into Diva's either because they were too drunk. So they went back to Winston's to find Rodney, but he was gone. Witnesses later confirmed he had walked a block away to Seawood's nightclub, a country western theme bar. The coat checker there described a unique jacket Rodney was wearing. The bouncer identified him from a photo lineup. And after Seawood's closed at 3 a.m., carloads of people left and headed to a house party at 725 Weldon Avenue. Almost 50 people were there, spilling out into the front lawn and into the street. Now, this house was well known to the Saskatoon police. In fact, on the same day as the party, police were called there at 10:15 p.m. for a noise complaint. And then they were called later because somebody said there was an SA assault. Now, it's never been confirmed if Rodney was at the party. Some people couldn't even say for sure if he actually showed up there. Others simply didn't want to talk to police. But what we know for certain is Rodney didn't make it back to his cousin's apartment. When Pat found Rodney's body the next morning, he was wearing his black windbreaker pants over his jeans, white Nike shoes, and that distinctive camouflage jacket the coat checker had described. Now, there was also another camouflage shirt next to his body, one about 30 feet away, along with a baseball cap. Footprints in the snow showed that Rodney had walked along a fence line west of the feed store, then walked into an open field, sometimes on his hands and knees. He returned to the feed store before collapsing. He also had been sick and had started shedding his clothes, which is classic symptoms of hypothermia. Now, the important part is his footprints were tracked back as far as Dudley Street and Avenue U, just over half a kilometer away. That's halfway between the house party on Weldon and the feed store where he passed away. But they couldn't be tracked any further because of hard-packed snow. The location of the feed store, southwest of the party, going further outside city limits. About 2 kilometers from the party, and just a couple of miles from where Darrell Night had been dropped off and abandoned that night before. Now, one responding officer, Constable Mitch Epp, noted something important. There appeared to be a small amount of dried blood around his nose and fluid leaking out of his left corner of his mouth. He was the only officer to note the blood. Other officers said there's no sign of violence or trauma. Sound familiar? Now, the autopsy ruled hypothermia, case closed. But wait, there's more. There's always more. Lawrence Wegner, 1 week later on February 3rd, 2000. Now, he was a railroad worker, found another body near the Queen Elizabeth Power Station. Lawrence Wegner was 30 years old, also from the Saskatoon First Nation, just like Darrell Night. Lawrence, he was a complicated guy. His father was German and his mother was First Nations, but he struggled with mental health and drug addiction. But he was also a dedicated student at Saskatchewan Indian Federated College, studying social work. Many of his classmates didn't even know he used drugs. They remembered him as someone who took his studies seriously and someone who wanted to help people. He'd been living in a group home for mentally handicapped people, but they evicted him for stealing prescription drugs. They just kicked him out without making sure he had a safe place to go. So on Sunday, January 30th, Lawrence was last seen by his classmates. Later that night, he was at his new apartment, getting high with his roommates using cocaine, morphine, and pills. Around 8 p.m., his roommates started fighting, so Lawrence left with an unnamed person. Within an hour, that unnamed person was admitted to St. Paul's Hospital for a drug overdose. And here's where it gets really suspicious. Because around midnight on January 30th, going into the 31st, 4 different people say they saw someone fitting Lawrence's description being thrown into the back of a police car at the hospital. All 4 witnesses said the man didn't have shoes or a jacket. 2 women who knew Lawrence actually came forward and they helped create a composite sketch of the officer they saw. But that sketch was only shown to one senior officer who said it didn't look like anybody under his command. The sketch was placed under a publication ban and couldn't be released to the public. And get this, one of the women who provided the sketch was later allowed to testify at the coroner's inquiry. And she said the sketch was shown publicly was not the same sketch that she had signed off on. She then created a new sketch herself to show what the officer actually looked like. These 4 witnesses' claims were dismissed. The police never admitted to picking Lawrence up. At 12:20 a.m., a mother and daughter named Jennifer and Eliza Whitecap called a non-emergency number to report a man banging on their door, yelling pizza. They looked out the window and recognized Lawrence as their cousin, Lawrence Wegner. He was wearing just a t-shirt and jeans when he left, heading back toward the hospital. Their next-door neighbor also reported seeing a man in the back of a police cruiser around that time, but couldn't remember the exact time or date. Now, here's where the evidence tampering gets blatant.
As if it isn't already.
I know.
Wow.
I mean, this is like, let me tell you how we screwed up.
Yeah.
And we really did a good job. But Sergeant Bruce Morrison took the call from the Whitecaps. He later testified that he issued a bolo, which we all know is be on the lookout, for the man pounding on the door. But there's no record of a bolo. It could never be found. A recording of the call was entered as evidence, and according to Sergeant Morrison, important information was missing from the tape, like the name and the address given during the call. Another sergeant, Kirk Dyke, testified that the call center system had never failed in 10 years and was only down for scheduled maintenance. Isn't that nice?
Yeah.
How did that happen?
Wow.
He said the tapes were locked in his storage room and only accessible to 6 senior members, including himself. On the tape, there was a noticeable click between a question Sergeant Morrison asked and the Whitecaps answered. Investigators at the inquiry believed the tape had been tampered with. No duh, Sherlock.
It was a tape and not just a
Yeah.
digital recording because it was too long ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So the timeline was being manipulated to make it seem like Lawrence was walking around after 4 witnesses saw him being put in a police car. We'll never know for sure, Lawrence's classmates became worried when he missed school on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. They said it was totally unlike him. His body was found on Thursday. And just for a moment, I'm going to stop. Just because someone has an addiction issue, we don't shame them. They still deserve the rights to be treated correctly. You know,
You're still a human being.
Exactly. You know, so that just, it blows my mind that people think like, well, you had some addiction issues. And we've talked about generational trauma and what happens to a lot of the First Nations, Native, and Indigenous people. So that's no excuse. But so on February 3rd, he was found on a Thursday by a railroad worker right next to the Queen Elizabeth Power Station. Getting a hint here? They kind of have an area they like.
That's a familiar path right there.
Yeah. Almost 5 kilometers from the White Caps' home, where someone called about a man pounding on the door. Lawrence was wearing only a t-shirt and jeans. His socks were clean and with no holes in it. It didn't appear he'd been walking on them at all. Now, I think I forgot to say when they found Neil Stonechild with the one shoe missing, they said his sock had almost been worn through and his feet were dirty from all the walking he had done on it. So how come his socks are clean with no holes? See, there, and no shoes anywhere. Something's going on here, peoples. His boots and jacket, the ones he borrowed from his roommate, they were never found. The autopsy ruled the cause of death as undetermined. The jury at the coroner's inquiry couldn't explain how he died or how he ended up near the power plant. Wow.
Well, I make a determination right here.
Okay,
and
what's
now,
that? Cool.
That somebody dumped him there.
Wow, I think you're on to something, Dog.
Wow. Yeah.
I really do. Well, after all this, Darrell Night comes forward. The same day Lawrence's body was found on Thursday, February the 3rd, Darrell Night and his uncle actually got pulled over by Sergeant Bruce Epp for a seatbelt violation. Darrell's uncle asked the officer if the body found that day had been identified. When asked why he wanted to know, the uncle explained what had happened to Darrell. Now, Sergeant Epp was one of the good police, you guys, and we're going to give him a shout out because thanks to him, some things started happening. He urged Darrell to come file a complaint. Darrell's response was, "Who's going to believe me?" But Sergeant Epp told him he needed time to speak to the police chief, Dave Scott, about it. The next day, on February the 4th, on a Friday, Sergeant Epp found Darrell in front of his uncle's apartment, and he motioned for Darrell to come over. And Darrell was scared. I mean, who wouldn't be? He thought maybe the police wanted to silence him for good. But Sergeant Epp told Darrell, "I believe you." Darrell went to the police station with his uncle and filed his complaint. That complaint went off like a bomb.
Well, I would say so.
Almost everyone had an opinion. Darrell started receiving death threats. Officers from the platoon that worked the night Darrell was abandoned were brought in for questioning. Darrell had given the wrong car number initially. So other officers were being blamed because remember, he thought the number was like 852 and it turned out he was reading it upside down. So, because the number he gave was actually a number of one of the cars with 2 other officers. And that's the only decent thing that the 2 officers did is they couldn't let their brother officers take the blame. So they actually came forward, Ken Munson and Dan Hatchen, and admitted to abandoning Darrell. So that was the only somewhat decent thing. But the police, and it stopped right there after they did that. The police chief at the time, David Scott, held a press conference but wouldn't confirm the officers admitted it. He said they were suspended with pay, agreeing to take polygraphs, and that nothing tied them to the deaths of Rodney and Lawrence. He announced that the Saskatoon police would investigate their own officers. And of course, the public was outraged, forced that decision to be reversed within hours, and the RCMP took over the investigation. The Federation of Saskatoon, Saskatchewan Indian Nations.
Oh, okay.
A lot of big words here, guys. Started their own task force. So the First Nation did, and they set up a tip line. They received over 800 complaints against the police within the first few weeks. Many people, and this right here is that police chief. Everybody take a good look at that dude, because like I told you, it starts at the top and goes down. If you have bad people in management, yeah. So over 800 complaints against the police within the first few weeks. Many people never formally filed their complaints because they were terrified of police retaliation. There were trials and inquiries in September 2001. And that's what that angry woman was saying. What about his record? Because it was the one with Daryl and, going the trial of Munson and Hatchin. And she was screaming, well, what about, Darrell Night's record? It didn't matter, lady. So he was drunk and disorderly at times. That has nothing to do with them trying to delete him. He wore the same shoes he had on the night he was abandoned. He called them his lucky shoes. The defense attorneys were brutal. And they did attack Daryl's credibility, pointing out he was on social assistance and was an admitted alcoholic. So that means you don't get to be treated correctly. They read his entire arrest record going back to 1996. They tried to say he was angry because he wanted to keep drinking, but the party was ruined. Ken Munson compared the whole ordeal to taking a dog out for a walk, referring to letting Daryl walk to blow off steam. His lawyer made another disturbing comparison, saying it was like sending a child to their room for misbehaving. They never challenged whether the officers took Daryl because they already admitted it. They were just trying to justify it. Munson and Hatchin were found guilty of unlawful confinement, not kidnapping, not attempted murder. They were sentenced to 8 months in jail. They only served 4. And get these officers had the audacity to apply for a sentencing circle. You know what that is? It's the traditional Indigenous healing practice used in restorative justice. These 2 men who terrorized an Indigenous person wanted to use the First Nations traditions to get a lighter sentence. The judge shut it down hard. He called their request confused and ironic and described their behavior as deathbed repentance. He pointed out that they pled not guilty and ran an aggressive defense where they called Daryl everything from a belligerent drunk to a welfare recipient to a racist. And then they wanted mercy using Indigenous First Nations practices. The judge wrote, the actions of the accused are so reprehensible that the court must denounce the unlawful conduct in the strongest terms. He said he noted there were strong suspicions that race did play a part in this offense. Like, no, duh. But said the Crown failed to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. Let me repeat that, you guys. They said they didn't prove racism, even though the Indigenous men were specifically targeted, even though no white people were given a Starlight Tour, even though the victims were exclusively First Nations. But sure, no evidence of racism. Good Lord. Then they actually, due to this, they did an inquiry for Neil Stonechild, going back to his death in 1990. and because of the pressure from Daryl's case. So they reinvestigated. The RCMP investigated was called Project Ferric and eventually led to a formal public inquiry in 2003. There's over 380 pages. When the RCMP began investigating, they asked officers, do you know of any other similar cases that happened in the past? In the spring of 2000, Officer Larry Hardwig brought up Neil Stonechild's name. But here's the thing. Hardwig was subsequently interviewed almost a dozen times over the next couple of years because the investigators suspected he knew more than he was saying, because he did know more. He was actually one of the officers who had picked Neil up in custody that night. And here's where we find out just how deep the corruption went. Remember, I told you Jason Roy's original statement disappeared? Well, a Saskatoon police officer named Ernie Loit, who was First Nations, had made a copy of Neil's case files years earlier because he suspected something was wrong. In 1998, Neil's original case file got destroyed because they said they were making room for renovations, even though deaths aren't supposed to be purged for 10 years. But Ernie's copy survived. And when the inquiry started in 2003, he turned it over to the RCMP. That copy showed just how flimsy and inadequate the original investigation had been. And it showed that Jason Roy's statement about seeing Neil in the police car was never properly recorded. And these are the two police officers right there on that screen. The inquiry examined police computer records, and here's what they showed: that at 11:51 p.m. on November 24th, dispatch call went out, a drunk needs to be removed. Neil Stonechild, 17 years old, at Snowberry Downs Apartments. Constable Larry Hartwig and Bradley Singer immediately hit their en route button. But before they even got to Snowberry Downs, they stopped Neil's cousin, Bruce Janel, on Confederation Drive. They asked Bruce if he was Neil Stonechild. Bruce showed them his ID, and they wrote down his name and let him go. Now, this is before the call about Neil came in. They were already looking for him. At 11:56, they pressed the at scene button, supposedly arriving at Snowberry Downs. But at the same time, they stopped Jason Roy in an alley next to Twin Gable Apartments, which was over a quarter of a mile away from Snowberry Downs. And that's when Jason saw Neil handcuffed in the back seat with blood on his face. And Neil screamed, "Jay, help me, these guys are going to kill me." Jason was wanted at the time on a probation violation, so he gave a false name. While they were running that name, they asked if he knew Neil, and Jason said no because he was scared of being arrested too. I mean, he had no idea what was going to happen. And at 11:59 p.m., they did a computer search on Neil's name, but they used the age of 18 instead of 17. His warrant showed up. They did this so if anyone ever questioned them, they could claim they didn't know it was Neil Stonechild. At 12:04 a.m., they ran Bruce Janel's name again, even though they'd let him go over an hour earlier, and he wasn't there. At 12:17, they hit the in-service button, claiming they cleared the call at Snowberry Downs. And they listed GOA, which is gone on arrival, meaning Neil wasn't there when they arrived. But that was a lie because Jason had seen him 20 minutes earlier with them. The inquiry found that the officers had adequate time to drive Neil to the area where he was found after leaving Jason around. 11:57 p.m., the route on Google Maps is 12 minutes one way. They probably drove faster than the speed limit, and at 12:30 a.m., they ran the name of Trent Ewert. That's the guy who had called 911 about Neil at Snowberry Downs in the first place. There was no reason to run his name at that point unless they were covering their tracks. Neil's body was found 5 days later. So the call came in at 12:54 on November 29th. Guess who took the call? Bradley Swanger. He was one of the cops that had picked him up, but he was filling in at the call center that day. And the testimony at the inquiry in 2003, Jason Roy, now in his 30s, testified. He told the truth about what he saw that night, and he admitted that in late December of 1990, when he was arrested on his warrant, officers had approached him about his statement and asked him to rethink it. Scared for his life, he lied and said he didn't remember seeing Neil. He said, "I was scared and lied to save my life." The inquiry determined his first statement was true. Neil was in the custody of the constables, Hartwig and Sanger. Larry Hartwig testified that he'd had 3 previous contacts with Neil over other matters. He said he knew Neil and his mom, Stella, but he claimed he didn't remember looking for Neil that night. Bradley Swanger also claimed he had no recollection of searching for Neil, even though the computer records prove they did. He said that when Neil was identified, he didn't put the pieces together, that this was just the same kid they'd been looking for. A police officer named Mackey admitted on the stand that it was common practice for some officers to unarrest people and drop them off without the person's consent. Think about it. It was common practice. The inquiry also revealed that Neil's clothing was destroyed without the family's consent. An officer burned them before his retirement, even though the family had asked for them back. And they suspect more was going on and wanted to do their own investigation because they suspected that he'd beat him up and there might be some DNA of theirs. When Larry Hartwig left the stand after testifying, witnesses reported he had an uncontrollable smirk on his face. That's the guy in the blue shirt. No sympathy, no remorse, no acknowledgement of the pain his actions caused. Larry Hartwig and Bradley Sanger were on the stand for 2 days as the inquiry wound down. The commissioner left to wade through the questions raised during the 6 months of testimony. Why was Neil's mother told that his death had been thoroughly investigated, even though evidence shows it wasn't? What did the investigating officer shortly before his retirement, why did he burn Neil's clothes? How did Neil end up dying alone in a field, wearing only one shoe? Everyone anxiously awaited the commissioner's report. But the findings in October of 2004, Justice David Wright released his final report. He concluded Neil Stonechild was encountered by constables, Hartwig and Sanger, on November 24th, 1990. They took him into custody. The injuries to Neil's face were likely caused by handcuffs. They are, if you look at them. The investigation was superficial and totally inadequate. Jason Roy's original statement was never properly recorded. Important information from other officers was dismissed. The file was closed with many unanswered questions. Department heads ignored pleas from Neil's family to reinvestigate. Self-protective and defensive attitudes were present at the inquiry and have been a problem in the past. But there wasn't enough evidence to lay criminal charges. But the inquiry confirmed Neil had contact with the police the night he died. Larry Hartwig and Bradley Sanger lost their jobs. They attempted to appeal the findings and failed, but they were never charged with anything related to Neil's death. And they worked for 14 years before this inquiry even came up. And they still insist they're innocent, and they still have supporters who believe this never happened. So listen.
So give him a slap on the hand and fire him and let him go do this somewhere else.
Yeah. And listen to what someone close to the case said about what happened to Neil. It's murder. As far as I'm concerned, there are no questions that whoever dropped him off out there knew that he had hardly any chance to get back. And to me, I'm convinced that he was possibly unconscious when he was dropped here too. And so if you drop someone off in minus 26-degree weather that's been beat up and got marks on him, and he's not going anywhere. He's not going to go anywhere from that spot that he's been dropped on the ground. The broader picture now, here's what we need to know. This wasn't about a couple of bad apples. This was systematic, you guys. Remember Officer Larry Hardwig, the one who had the smirk, the blonde guy with the blue shirt, the one before all this came out, he had been appointed as the community liaison officer specifically to build trust with the Native and First Nations community.
Yeah, sure.
In a November 2002 interview, he said, I've worked on 3 different reserves. That's what they call their reservations. And I've developed a healthy respect for the Aboriginal community. We always had to be very, very careful as police officers. We have a tremendous amount of authority. And with that comes a tremendous amount of responsibility. We must never, ever abuse our authority. As police officers, we have the authority to literally destroy lives. We literally do have that authority, and we must always be careful that the authority is never, ever. Sounds good, right? Like Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility.
Yeah, but he knew that, so it was easy for him to do it. Yeah.
This was the exact guy that was involved in Neil Stonechild's death and did the exact opposite of what he was preaching.
Mm-hmm.
The Royal Canadian Mounted Police have a motto, which I can't read it in whatever it is, and it means maintain the right or uphold the right. But what right were they upholding when they left First Nations and Native people to freeze to death? Healing and remembering. But you know what? Despite all the pain, despite all the injustice, the First Nations communities have come together to heal. Neil loved round dances, and his community honored him with a memorial round dance, as one community member said, and it's a healing thing for us because everybody is remembering him with us at the memorial round dance. The reason why we make the round dance is to heal ourselves and get together. He loved round dances too. The elders held sweats for the families, especially for the Wegner family. They asked the Creator to give them courage and acceptance, and they prayed for the victims, honoring them in ceremonies, acknowledging that they were in the spirit world. The elders, when they hear and know of families that are in pain, like the Wegners and the Stonechilds, they do everything they can to give them the courage and acceptance and help and pray for the victims. It breaks your heart that these people that we're supposed to protect and honor, they could have cared less. And the fact that they got away with it. And it still happens. And there are other names. I mean, there was, let me get a list. We had Ronnie, and there was Lloyd Dusty Horn and Darcy. Oh man, can't even read my own handwriting. Darcy Dean Ironchild, and there are many others. And there are some we'll never know, because with them calling and saying, well, it was hypothermia, or they were drunk and they wandered away. So there's probably a lot of pathology reports that if they were investigated, because that's actually what Neil's mother tried to do, was they did eventually exhume him and try and get some proof. But by then it was a little too late. And they couldn't find what they needed, So it breaks your heart. Because in 2019, Drayton Bowl, he was 19 years old. He actually filed a complaint because almost 20 years after Daryl was picked up by the Saskatoon police and dropped off the outskirts of town, this young man, he was taken to the hospital and treated for a concussion because the same thing had happened to him. So, and the fact that the Saskatoon Police Service investigates themselves, that's a laugh.
Yeah. Fowler, I think it was Fowler that said, send me a complaint. If you have a complaint, send me a formal thing about the complaint, and I'll investigate it.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Well, since this inquiry in 2004, now all the cars have GPS systems in them, which, come on. If they want to figure out how to prevent that from doing the work.
Yeah, nobody's ever disconnected one of those things either.
Yeah, kind of like, remember when they said the system went down?
Yeah.
And the tape was, had a click. Well, with Drayton's injuries, they were real. His trauma was real. And the fact that he even thought this could happen to him in 2019 tells you everything about the legacy of the Starlight Tours. This practice, like I said, isn't just in Canada. I think those are the first times it's really mentioned, but it's happening in the U.S. People in border towns near reservation areas, they know. They've always known. And why does it matter? Well, let's talk about what we're seeing today. We're seeing communities, Black communities, and Native communities, Latino communities. They're expressing deep distrust of law enforcement. We're seeing people terrified of ICE, and people wonder, why don't they just comply? Why don't they trust the police? This is why, you guys. I mean, Alligator Alcatraz in Florida has, I think they said, over 1,400 people missing. They don't know where they are. Now, how did people that have been in your little concentration camp disappear? Yeah, questions. Because when you're a minority in North America, you learn that the badge doesn't always mean protection. Sometimes it means danger. When you're Native, First Nation, Indigenous, you learn that a traffic stop might end with you in a frozen field. You learn that drunk and disorderly could be a death sentence. You learn that officers who swear to protect and serve, they don't see you as someone worth even protecting or serving or reporting. You learn, even when there's evidence, computer records, witness testimony, injuries consistent with handcuffs, bodies found in the exact same location, the system will protect its own. You learn that evidence disappears, tapes get tampered with, files get destroyed, witnesses get pressured to change their stories, sketches get messed up. You learn that officers will get convicted of unlawful confinement instead of attempted murder. That they'll serve 4 months instead of years. That they'll keep their pensions and move on with their lives while your family has to bury a frozen body. So the question we need to ask, and this keeps me up, do bad cops join the police force seeking power and control over vulnerable people? Or does the system create bad cops by protecting them when they abuse that power? I don't know the answer.
Now, I would think that is probably the first.
Yeah. I mean, Sergeant Epp, hey, he went and told Daryl he believed him.
Yeah.
He did his due diligence. He was a good one. And maybe it's a little bit of both. I know this. We love to celebrate the good cops here, and Sergeant Bruce Epp, hey, Constable Ernie Lout, he made a copy of Neil's file and kept it over a decade because he knew something was wrong. These are good cops. But we call out the bad. And we'll always call out the bad.
Yeah, those are people that actually deserve a medal.
Yeah, they do. Because Neil Stonechild deserved better. Rodney, Naistus, Rodney, I'm sorry. Lawrence Wegner, they deserve better. Lloyd Dusty-Harm, Darcy Dean Ironchild, that unnamed woman from 1976, Drayton Bull, they all deserve better. And even every one that we don't even have their name, or they're just afraid to call the police because they might end up in a field. They deserve a system that actually upholds the right. The legacy Starlight Tours exposed more than just individual acts of cruelty. They revealed a system in racial prejudice and indifference, a system that saw Indigenous lives as disposable, a system where police investigated police, found nothing wrong until a survivor stood up and forced the truth into light. Through reforms followed the inquiries, though officers were fired, policies were changed, the legacy of those nights still haunts Saskatchewan. For the families who lost sons and brothers and fathers to the cold, the stars above the prairie remind both a witness and a wound. Neil Stonechild's mother, Stella, she fought for over a decade to have her son's death properly investigated. She ended up moving back to Manitoba after Neil had passed, but she never gave up. She never let them forget her baby boy. Her words echo in the cold. I never forget my son. When it's cold out there, it doesn't bother me when I'm shaken and cold because he was out here freezing. I can go inside and get warm, but he never got to. Didn't have that chance. He wasn't given the opportunity to save himself, and I know he wanted to. Darrell Night, the man who survived and whose courage made these investigations possible, he ended up moving to British Columbia after he testified. He passed away in April of 2023 at age 56. They brought him back home to the Saskatoon First Nation and laid him to rest. Before he died, he said, "While I'm happy to be alive, those crops tried to take my life, and I value my life." Nobody deserves that. It doesn't matter what nationality, if you're black, white, Indian, Asian, it does not matter. We're all human. You cut us, we all bleed red. Lawrence Wegner's mother, Mary, said she didn't blame the police for her son's death, that everything happens for a reason. She's a bigger person than me. She believed the truth one day would be revealed. Perhaps someone would make a deathbed confession. Sadly, she passed away in 2019, her husband before her. But let's get to some missing people, because I didn't mean to talk so long, you guys. I'm so sorry. This was a big case. I just kept going down rabbit holes with it. Thank you guys for sticking with us. I appreciate it. Remember, when you're out and about, please keep alert. Watch, put down the cell phone. You could save somebody's life. People leave voluntarily, but sometimes once they're gone, they don't have a choice to return home. So let's remember that. And good news, Sarah Isabel Martinez has been in touch with her family. So Samantha advised to let us know. So let's, recognize we would like to hear the good things too when people come home. So, they've asked for some privacy now, and that's perfectly great. We're just glad that Sarah has been located. And remember, if you're nervous about contacting the police, email us, tips, 4, trialjunkiesunited@gmail.com. We'll pass the information on. You have the power to serve a life. And this is the first one. His name is Angel Marquince Mendez. He's 15. He's been missing since November 20th from the Golden Valley County, North Dakota. He's 6 foot tall. He weighs 135 pounds. He has brown hair. Sometimes he wears it long, and sometimes he tucks it under his beanie. He has brown eyes. Clothing he was last seen in is unknown. These are some photos that show him with the both short and long hair. He often wears the dark beanie and dark clothing. If you have any information, you guys, even something small, please share it with the Golden Valley Sheriff's Office at 701-872-4733. Next, we have Angeline Eileen Pete, and she's 28. Now, this is an old case. She's been missing since May 26th of 2011 from North Vancouver, British Columbia. She has brown eyes. She wears contacts. She has dark brown long hair. She dyes it frequently. She's 5'4" and 150 pounds. She has a square-shaped birthmark on her left wrist, a scar on her left knee, and on her leg, she has a butterfly tattoo on her chest. If you have any information about Angeline, contact North Vancouver RCMP 604-969-69 7515, or the Crime Stoppers 1-800-222-8477. Bettina B. Beaver, 38. She's been missing since October 17th of 2025 from Tulsa, Oklahoma. She is with the Muskogee Creek Nation. She has brown hair, or brown eyes, black hair, 5'4", 250 pounds. She was last seen wearing a white tank top and jean shorts. She has a left nose piercing. She was being dropped off at a Pilot Travel Plaza near East Reno Avenue and South Martin Luther King Avenue in Oklahoma City at 2:30 p.m. She was going to travel out of state on a Greyhound, but was later arrested on the 16th. But she was released on the 17th of October, and she hasn't been seen or heard from since. So if anybody has any information on Bettina, contact the Sheriff's Department at 918-732-7200. The case number is T as in Tom, C as in Cat, S as in Sam, 252-1346. Next, we have Kateri Spencer. She's 17. She's been missing since November 15th and from Gresham, Oregon. And she's 5'2" and 140 pounds. She has brown hair or brown eyes. Everybody puts these things different, so I get it confused. Black hair. And the case number here is M as in Michael, 4786-68017. Contact the Gresham Police at 503-823-3333. So just remember the case of Neil Stonechild. He was a child. He was 17, who wrestled, played hockey, was an Army cadet, loved round dances. He had dreams. He didn't get a chance to straighten his life out. He wanted to. He did have plans. He was loved. He would be 52 today. Instead, he's a name on a memorial, a case file, a reminder of what happens when power goes unchecked and racism is woven into the fabric of a system. Rodney was 25 when he died. He'd just gotten out of jail and wanted to spend time with his brother before going home. Lawrence was 30. He was studying social work, trying to help people like him that had, some mental health issues. They all had families, and they all had people who loved him. They all deserve to live. We say Neil Stonechild's name, we say Rodney's name, we say Lawrence's name, and we say Daryl's. And we honor Daryl's courage, because if he hadn't come forward, this might not have gotten discovered for a long time. We say the name of the victims, known and unknown, because I'm sure there's a lot we have no clue. Remember, you guys, silence is betrayal. Every killer depends on your silence. Every corrupt system depends on your silence. Every abuse of power depends on your silence. So don't give it to them. If you know something, speak up. Because it wasn't a mannequin. It never is. And remember, someone knows something. Someone always does. If you have information, contact about any of these cases, contact someone. Don't always think someone else is going to do it. Call 911 if you have to. They don't bite. So reach out. And just remember, you guys, we love you. We appreciate you coming and hanging out with us. I'm sorry I got so talkative. Like I said, this one just got me through a rabbit hole. And there were 380 pages of that inquiry. Lord have mercy. Every Thursday, we do our dedication to our missing and murdered Indigenous and Native brothers and sisters. On Sundays, we'll do cold cases, trial updates, or just stories we feel need some voices, or legal matters that we think need attention. So thanks for taking the time to hang with us. We appreciate that you guys spend time with us. Doc?
And we appreciate everybody's comments too.
Yes.
It's really, it makes for a much more enjoyable time.
Yes. And I do want to say that we have been getting some coffees and some Venmos that we really appreciate, like Pammy and Fowla and Jorge, a gentleman. I think File Freak, Billy. I'm going to try and get better at letting people know, because we do appreciate it. It does help. Say goodnight, Doc.
Good night, Doc.
I love you. And we love you guys. So come hang out with us on Sunday night. Who knows what we'll get into? It'll be something good. And if you have an idea you want us to look into, hey, drop us an email. We love you. Ciao. Listen to the song.
You might hear Starlight Tour and think it sounds fun, but not in Saskatoon, not this place, not this time. Minus 28 degrees in the dead of night. They picked him up and drove him out of sight. Neil Stonechild was only 17, found face down where the winter winds had been. One shoe missing, marks upon his wrist. Another brown boy the system dismissed. Starlight tours through the prairie snow, protect and serve. But we all know the badge and the uniform, blood on their hands, a pattern carved across these lands. But who believes native sons and men? Darrell Night lived to tell the story. Against all odds he reached the power station's light. His survival and courage to speak shattered the silence buried in the night. Lloyd, Dusty Horn, Darcy, Dean, Iron Child, Rodney, Naistus, Lawrence, Wegner, too, frozen where the city limits cut through. 8 months in prison, that's where it stopped, while Neil's investigation was quietly dropped. And no more justice came for the others. Ooh, Starlight tours through the prairie snow, protect and serve. But we all know the badge and the uniform, blood on their hands, a pattern carved across these lands. But who believes native sons and men? The stories whispered, carried on the wind. A boy, a survivor, and the lives that could have been. The cold doesn't forget, the snow doesn't lie. We lift their names and we testify. Starlight tours through the prairie snow, the whole community tried to let them know. Neil was a boy just 17. Daryl survived to speak what he'd seen, and no wonder people feel the blue. And protect and serve don't apply to you. Speak their names into the winter wind. Neil Stonechild, we remember him. The truth was there, quiet but strong. Now we live their stories through our song, in memory of Neil Stonechild and all victims of the Starlight Tours. With gratitude to Darrell Night for speaking